Hi, this is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we're going to talk about what happened in the comic market last week. Stay tuned! Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. So, like I mentioned last week, I decided I wanted to start monitoring some of the sales that I was tracking with the Heritage Weekly Auction a little more closely to kind of see if I could pull any trends out or anything like that over time, just to see what's going on with the strength or weakness in the comic market, comic book sales, that kind of thing. So just a quick recap for what I've been doing for that is I basically pick a bunch of books from the Heritage Auction that I'm interested in following. They go across all ages and most genres generally. I estimate their prices. I also have now started capturing their prior high sales, so I can look at that as well. And then I'm going to use this information, like I said, to just see how things are changing over time. And so last week, so for the auction that was on April 25th, I priced 175 books. There was 53% of them that were above my estimate, 47% that were below, 20% that were over 20% above my estimate, and 13% that were more than 20% below my estimate. Then this last week, I priced 183 books, about the same, and I again saw 53% above my estimate, 47% below. This time, though, I saw 27% that exceeded my estimate by 20%, and 17% that fell below my estimate by 20%. So it seems like on the high end, we're seeing a little more extremes, and on the low end, we're seeing a little bit more extremes. Now, I think this is something that's going to be more useful as I look at it week after week for a relatively long period of time. So I'm not going to try to draw a bunch of conclusions with a single week, but I think it's useful to have this information every week as I move forward. Now, the new piece of information that I started capturing this last week, because I thought it would be maybe even more useful, was the number of new high sales. Now, this is the high sales within the grade of that book. And I saw 94 new high sales out of 183 books that I priced. Now, that is significant. So I thought that was something that was really worth reporting, is that we are seeing a lot of books that are selling for new high sales within their grades, over 50%. So that's something I thought was significant. Now, I did, again, try to look at the books and see if there were any trends that I saw, and I thought it would be most useful, again, to look at the new high sales, where those were happening. And I saw these new records across gold, silver, bronze, and modern, but Golden Age was really strong. Saw a lot of new high sales with Disney-type books, 10 different ones out of the ones that I captured. There were Walt Disney's Comics and Stories, Mickey Mouse Magazine, 4-color comics with Donald Duck. I mean, so Disney was very strong. Then a lot of pre-code books that like Weird Fantasy, Witchcraft, Teenage Temptations, Punch Comics, Mystic Comics, Zoot Comics, Journey into Fear, Archie, Human Torch. So again, there were romance books, pre-code horror books, pre-code sci-fi books, war type books. So a lot of different genres across the Golden Age. Now, I did also see 5 new highs within the X-Men books that I watched, and 4 different Marvel premiere books. Number 1, which is the first Warlock, number 15 and 16, which are the first and second appearance of Iron Fist, and number 47, which is the first appearance of Ant-Man. So I did see some interesting strong sales kind of in that Bronze Age Marvel set as well. Now, like I said, I did see it across all ages. Those are the ones that stuck out to me as having multiple similar books that all had these high sales. Now, let's get into the significant sales that I saw over this last week. I picked out 5 different books this week, and the first one, this is one of those books that as I was watching the sale, it's where I go, what the hell is going on? As I saw that sale happen, I couldn't believe the price kept going up. So this was Astonishing Tales number 25 right here. And this was a CGC 9.6 that sold for $2,160. Now, this is the first appearance of Deathlock. It is also the first George Perez work, And I had estimated the price at $900, which I had already thought was pretty aggressive because that was the new record that was set the prior week. And this was 140% above that $900 sale. So just, blowing it out of the water. And I've heard rumblings of people kind of specking on that book, whether it's for Deathlock or for the first George Perez work. But, that is a huge jump in a single week. And a month ago, this was a $750 book. So basically tripled in that time frame. And a year ago, I owned a 9.6 of this book that I sold for $525, which was, I think, the high at that time. So that's a book that has now gone up 4 times, 300% in that time period. Now, if you do want that book, it's a Bronze Age book. It's very reasonable to get in kind of the mid or lower grades. A 6.5 sold last month for $99. A 7.5 sold for $225. So you can definitely get into a nice presenting copy for $100 to $200. Now, the next book is one of my favorite Silver Age books, and I'm glad that this one's finally starting to, kind of feel like it's getting a little more respect, at least with respect to value. And this was Detective Comics 359 in a 5.5, and it sold for $1,320. This is a record in that grade. And this is the first appearance of Barbara Gordon as Batgirl, and like I said, one of my favorite Silver Age books. I love the purple cover. And I had estimated it at $1,000. And this was actually the prior high from April 13th, just a couple weeks ago. And this went 32% above my estimate, $320 above my estimate. And now, this book has always been popular. She is the most popular version of Batgirl. However, it had been relatively flat for quite a while, around $600 to $700 in this grade. And that all changed back on January 17th when a 9.8 sold for $132,000. And sometimes you'll see when you get one of those really high grade copies that sells for a really, really big number, it pulls up the other grades with it. And I think that's what we're seeing here. The same thing happened with Batman 181, the first appearance of Poison Ivy. Back in November of last year, a 9.8 sold for $90,000, and that has had a very similar effect, pulling up the values of lower grade copies of that book. Now, Detective Comics 359 isn't becoming an expensive book across all grades. A 2.5 sold on April 5th for $415. So you might be able to get kind of like a low, 2.0, 1.0 copy, a raw copy for a couple $100. But generally it's going to be, $500, $600 to get into a copy of that book. Now, her second appearance is a great option to go for with this book. And I'll plug in the picture up here. This is Detective Comics number 363. And she's also on the cover with Batman and Robin. Like I said, much more affordable. A 9.0 sold on May 6th for $480. An 8.0 sold for $202 on April 12th. So this is definitely a book that you can get into for a couple $100 or less. Now, this week, it just seems to be a lot of my favorites that I'm getting to talk about because the next one is House of Secrets, number 92 in a 6.0 that sold for $1,800. Again, another record in this grade. And this is the first appearance of Swamp Thing. It's a incredible Bernie Wrightson cover. Like I've mentioned, one of my favorite Bronze Age books. Now, this one, I had estimated the price at $1,300, and this was 38% above my estimate. And the prior high was $1,300 back on March 19th, and it had had a few sales at that price in the past. And this book has always had kind of like a cult following. It does tend to be pretty expensive in even mid to high grades because of the dark cover, but prices really haven't moved much until I think just recently with the rest of the market, comic market kind of going up, it's raising up the prices of this book as well. I mean, a year ago, this was an $800 to $1,000 book, so that's still a big jump. About 100%, a little more, but not as much as we're seeing in the Marvel keys, but still significant for DC. Now, this is an expensive book in all grades. A 0.5 sold for $210 back on January 25th, and you're traditionally going to have to pay at least $400 to $500 to get into this book. So what I would really recommend going after is Swamp Thing number 1 if you're looking for an alternative to this book. Now, I'm talking about the first series from 1972, not the second series from the 80s. This one also has an incredible cover. 7.5 sold for $227 on April 27th. A 4.5 sold for $155 on April 9th. So you can get a solid mid-grade copy of this book for just a couple $100. And even high-grade copies aren't that bad. A 9.0 sold for $480 on April 27th. But if we see Swamp Thing show up in the Justice League Dark show that's supposed to be coming to HBO Max, all these books could get much more expensive. So it might be something that's worthwhile trying to pick up now before that actually happens. Now, this next book was another one that I was just shocked as I was watching this auction, and this one was selling because the price was so outside of what I was expecting for it. And this is Jungle Action number 6 in a 9.6 that sold for $2,400. Now, this is the first appearance of Killmonger. Now, this has been a relatively overlooked book, but it's got two things going for it. It is a villain book, which is the downside. You know, with Killmonger, that was played by Michael B. Jordan, who was killed in the Black Panther movies, so I don't know if we'll be seeing him again. But it is also the first Black Panther solo story. He shows up in Jungle Action 5, but first solo story in Jungle Action 6. So it does have some significance, you know, kind of like a key aspect to Black Panther. But like I said, you know, if it's Killmonger that this is going on, that character was killed, and I know there's been some rumors that maybe he's coming back to play Black Panther. I don't know how much truth there is to that, but for this book, I had estimated the price at $1,500, and this was 60% above my estimate. And the prior high was only $737 back in 2018, so this just destroyed that record. And there had even been a $520 sale back in August of last year. However, there had been a couple recent very high 9.4 sales, with the book selling in a 9.4 for $1,300 on February 12th and $1,200 on April 19th. So that's why I came up with the $1,500 estimate. I was expecting the book to react to those prices, but not this strongly. Now, there has been a lot of movement around other Black Panther books recently. His solo title, just the Black Panther, has been hitting records. Fantastic 452, his first appearance, has been hitting records. So there is a lot of movement in those books. So it's not a surprise we're seeing it here, but this is just one of the latest things where, you know, those first books like Fantastic 452 start getting way too expensive, and people start moving on to things like first solo stories, second appearances, that kind of thing. Now, this book is still relatively affordable in mid-grades. A 6.5 sold for $396 on April 9th, and a 3.5 sold for $200 on February 27th. It's a Bronze Age book, so there aren't as many low-grade copies available graded. So it might be a book that's worthwhile to try to search out raw and get it that way. All right, now the last book, because I was talking about Golden Age, I wanted to talk about at least one Golden Age book, and this is Mystic Comics number 5. And this is a CGC 7.0 that sold for $5,760. And it's technically a record because there was no prior sale in this grade, and this is the only copy that exists in this grade. But, you know, not really a record, but it did set the benchmark for this grade moving forward. Now, this is an Alex Schomburg war cover from 1941, and those are always going to be in high demand. It's also kind of a Golden Age key as well, because it's the origin of the Black Marvel. It's also the first appearance of the Terror, and I had estimated the price at $3,800, and this was 52% above my estimate. And the challenge with rare Golden Age books like this really is trying to estimate what the price is going to be, because, like I said, it's rare. There are only 26 universal copies of this book, and so they don't sell all that often. Golden Age books also tend to price a little bit differently than silver and bronze. In silver and bronze, you'll see some relatively big jumps across grades, but with Golden Age, a lot of time they will have a high baseline value. You know, like it won't go below $1,000 or $1,500 or something like that, even at a 1 or a 0.5. But as you move up, it's not making these 10x jumps, you know, between grades. It's going up a couple $1,000s or a few $100s or something like that. So now, like I said, there hadn't been any prior sales in this grade, but there had been a 5.5 that sold for $3,000 in November and a 3.0 that sold for $1,600 in December. So for this, I was generally trying to use the dollars per point type method of estimating what the price would go for, what it would go for, and that's where I came up with $3,800, and it clearly just, you know, there were a couple people or a few people that really wanted that book, and it hit a much higher number than that, you know, $5,760. Like I said at the beginning, Alex Schomburg war covers are always going to be expensive and in demand, but he did create them across quite a few different titles. So you might have a chance, you know, to pick one up. If you watch enough of them, you might be able to grab one for, you know, an affordable price. So he did these in Marvel Mystery Comics, Startling Comics, Submariner, Captain America Comics, Mystic Comics like this. And so just watch some of those different titles. You might get lucky. You might find one and get to, you know, add a Alex Schomburg war cover to your collection. All right, so that's all the books I had to talk about this week. I mean, there were obviously plenty more with the 90-plus record sales that I saw this week, but it's been busy. I don't know. It takes a lot of time to put these videos together and to research everything, so could only get through 5, you know, high sales this week, but I just wanted to make sure I got this video out because now that I'm starting to track those metrics, I want to be able to report that every week. So if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this, and I will see you in the next video.